Hello all, and welcome to another episode of the Market Pulse presented by Smart Touch. I am your host, Aaron Fichera, and today we will be listening to part 2 of our discussion with Gary Davis over Texas politics, land development in the Hill Country, and the emergence of the region called the Texas Triangle. If you haven't gotten a chance to listen to part 1, please visit our archives and give it a listen. Now sit back and enjoy part 2 with Gary Davis. Well, what I'd like to do is get into our next subject matter, things that go together really well: peanut butter and jelly, love and marriage, real estate, and Texas politics. There seems to be an intimate connection between those two. First I would also like to give the context, given your experience and over, decades. How do you foresee the trends in housing, especially in regions like the Texas Hill Country and just broader Texas? I know we talked about demographics, but what are you seeing?
So I really see it in two different ways. First of all, I'm a big fan of development that achieves a higher density of housing in an urban area. And I think the two go together. High density and urban living are paired very, very well. But I'm a big fan of that. However, on the flip side, there's a desirability of suburban living today, especially in Texas, where we do still have abundant land to develop, and we will continue to really be in a dominant position, I think, for the location of residential housing growth, and more especially housing that's in master plan communities in the suburban areas with amenities that are within those communities that appear to appeal to the residents. The other thing about it is there are more people now working from home than prior to COVID, just because of the dynamic of the COVID effect, as they call it. And so a pretty substantial part of the work week, people are working from home, and that has removed what was considered a previous barrier to a long work commute 5 days a week for a lot of people. I mean, it just was really tiresome, and that's no longer a factor in people choosing to live in the suburbs of a metropolitan area. So I think we'll have some of both. I don't think we can in any way support the projected population increases, which we've already been experiencing, unless we do have both. I think what this means is, I think it's inevitable that the Texas Hill Country region that has a natural beauty and has terrain, topography, it will continue to attract lower density residential housing developments, assuming that there is an availability of water that can be confirmed, let's just say, for the next 100+ years. The provision of water primarily in the Hill Country is going to be provided by surface lakes, which there are quite a number located in the Texas Hill Country, fortunately. But it will also have to be supported by better conservation measures during periods of drought and otherwise that I touched on previous. So I wouldn't be surprised to see small cities and communities in Texas pretty soon adopt protocols of recycling wastewater. I think that you can look at the city of Las Vegas. While they don't really advertise this, maybe for some reasons of concern, but the city of Las Vegas recycles all of their wastewater, 100%. Every bit of it recycled.
So there is something in the water out there.
There is something in the water. But what is in the water is actually, as a result of recycling, is actually more desirable if that water just came from another source and was treated from another source. There's been there's been a big recycled wastewater. There's not been a good educational effort about it. And so anyway, it's actually better and cleaner than water from any other source because the protocols of recycling it are so strict. So I have no issue with that. And Arizona cities are doing it now. And so I just think Texas cities will have no choice but to recycle their wastewater and change their recycling plants. Instead of taking that recycled wastewater and putting it in a small creek that's a tributary to a larger creek that's a tributary to a river that ends up going into a surface lake anyway, locally they're going to end up recycling it and using it again and again and again. So I think that's the impacts of what's going to be needed, and I think we'll see housing density, which is a function of availability of utilities, and water being the primary utility and resource that's needed. I think we'll see some of both. I think in addition to that, in the context of where will housing go in the future and what kind of housing will it be, we're going to have to improve the roadways. That as though highways are not constantly under construction now anyway.
So you've been out on 35 as well.
And we haven't seen anything yet with the stretch of downtown, as you know, that's going to undergo
The next decade is just going to be.
Yeah. But it's going to be critical to improve these roadways, and it's going to have to be done by the Texas Department of Transportation in the areas of growth. And transportation is such a critical infrastructure need. It's another one of the various components of infrastructure, and it's needed so critically. And there's going to have to be additional funding at not only the state level but the federal level of governments to do this. So I just think it's inevitable that there will have to be other forms of mass transportation. Now we have traditional forms of mass transportation, which are buses, of course, and there is high-speed rail that we don't really see much of except in the northeastern parts of the United States, where there is the highest density of population per square mile. But I think we will see eventually, sooner rather than later, I think we'll see high-speed rail in a lot of other areas of the United States, and I think it'll come to Texas. And I think it'll be built out to serve the growth areas. But I do believe with technology innovation in technology never stops. It just goes to the next new thing, as you know. And so I think we'll see other forms of mass transportation that are astounding. I mean, the advances in technology since the 1950s are astounding. I mean, to think that the iPhone that is used by so many people today, and of course we have Android phones too, but these smartphones are more powerful than the original computer that sent man to the moon. So what you hold in your hand and use has more computational power than the computers at NASA that were used to send man to the moon. That's astounding. It's transformational versus these.
Well, completely agree. When I used to teach, I'd get that same analogy, and I'd preface this with, there should be no excuse for stupidity. You have access to things that are limited to the only upper echelons of society, skills, knowledge, information, connectivity.
That's right.
It's a brave new world.
It is a brave new world. So we have to have these other ways of getting people from point A to point B that supplement. They may not replace, but they have to supplement automobiles that are driven by single occupants from point A to point B. That is not sustainable. They did a survey, the city of Austin did, 80% of the commuters that commuted from the suburbs in the Austin metropolitan area to downtown Austin to work, 80% of the automobiles every day were driven by a single occupant. How is that?
I'm ashamed to say I'm one of those people.
Well, sure. Yes. And so how is that sustainable long term? Even it's not. Yeah. So there will be ways of transporting people from point A to point B that you and I have not even thought of. I'm confident that's going to happen.
Well, Gary, I'm going to ask you a loaded question. With these hurdles and the focus of housing and affordability and developing of land in a stewardship but profitable manner, what's your thoughts on the current political climate? Are we prepared? Are we ready to face these challenges? Or are there things that we need to kind of do differently or you believe are necessary to change?
Well, so here we go. I mean, I'll just jump right in. And I have friends on both sides of the political aisle, as they say. So I still have an idealistic viewpoint that people, regardless of their political affiliation with either of the two major organized parties or whether they're an independent, regardless of those three, I think people, for the most part, are well-intentioned and they want to do the right thing. But I think that sometimes a lack of proper education is the missing link. And when I say education, I'm talking about maybe a lack of informed dialogue and discourse, using facts instead of things that create drama. So I believe that we need a better quality of leadership at most of the higher state government offices in Texas, at least when it comes to an understanding of we really need a regulation of land use and land development. We don't have the statutory authority outside of the city limits of these metropolitan cities and even these smaller cities. It does not exist to where the county governments can regulate how land is used and how it's developed. They don't have the legal right to say that. So here I am. A lot of people say, wow, so you're a real estate developer and you want more regulation?
That's exactly where I was going to go to. You want to put another layer?
Yeah, are you kidding me? But a lot of people would say that perhaps are really isolated in developing, maybe in the Austin metropolitan region, and I'm doing that too right now. So I know what it takes to go through a development approval process in Travis County, whether you're inside the city limits or outside the city limits of Austin. I've experienced it both ways. So I understand that, but I just think that there needs to be an educational effort by some real experts in the field of land development. And if that were done and studies were done, I think it would result in a majority of the state legislators realizing that mostly unregulated land use and development outside of a municipal jurisdiction is not good for Texas, and it's not good for its residents. Now, there are some legislators that already realize this, and I've spoken with, and they understand it very well, but they're currently in the minority, and they have no ability to bring about change in the legal statutes that governs this. But to sum it up, county governments really should be given more enforcement tools to control how land is developed in a responsible way. If that is not done, we're going to have a mess. We're going to have a hodgepodge of developments that don't reflect well on Texas and how things should be done in a responsible way. So I'm hoping to spark really, again, it's going to have to be not only on both sides of the aisle, but with the state leadership. You know what? We do need to do something and give the tools to county governments to have some land use regulation. Other states give their county governments and their county, they do give them much more enforcement powers than what we realize in the state of Texas. So I think it's needed because in the end, I think everybody will come out a winner.
So it sounds like we need to kind of, by adding that layer or bringing it to the county level, you're going to ultimately take it out of the hands of more local and smaller knit and be more kind of almost like a proliferation that
Yeah.
have access just because it's a wider
Well,
apparatus of enforcement. And
I think you need to give them the tools, you need to give them the education, you need to give them the staff, and they need to have the ability to say, here's how your land can be developed. There needs to be developer input into this. But I can tell you, Aaron, right now you can go into the Texas Hill Country and you can see one neighbor fighting another neighbor over what's going on with each other's land.
mm-hmm.
And they don't have anyone to appeal to, and it gets so dramatic. They call the county sheriff and they send deputies out and they explain to these people who don't understand, well, look, we can't tell your neighbor what he can and can't do with his land unless it's something that would be harmful to the welfare of citizens in the county. And you can't tell your neighbor what to do. So sorry, you're in the county. There's not much we can say to you about what you do with your land and how you use it. Well, that's not good. There has to be, it doesn't have to be a whole big ball of red tape. That's not what I'm proposing, but it does need to have some framework, okay, to where land is developed in a responsible way to accommodate this growth. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think you touched on it. We talked about the partnership, one being around the local, but we have to talk about the private entities being the developers, real estate groups coming in. They have a part to play and a responsibility, but they also have a fiduciary responsibility to make a profit. Gary, I don't think you develop land out of the kindness of your heart. There has to be something, but I don't say that providing value and growth and economic development and making a profit, a sustainable profit, has to be mutually exclusive. So, from a developer standpoint, what's the role of the developer in politics, with these pressures of rapid expansion, but also, sustainability and being community focused? How do we balance it?
Well, by the way, you're correct. I have never developed land that for the goodness of my heart and done so intentionally. If I did do that, it was unintentional, and I try to avoid that. It's the biggest learning experiences I always have had, but it's not intentional that I do it. We are in business to make a profit. I'm a capitalist. I'm not ashamed of being a capitalist. And so I try to serve all of the different sectors of the home buying public, from affordable all the way to luxury. And I do operate at both ends of the spectrum. But to your question, as I just mentioned, these county governments just need to be given authority to regulate land development outside of the municipal jurisdictions, which have zoning powers and much higher regulatory control. And it needs to be done in a very responsible way. And if this were done, I think developers, they would all have a framework to use and they would be good stewards of how our state is developed over the next 50 to 75 years. It's just so important. The home builders and the developers would respond favorably, I believe, to new county regulations with respect to land development if the new regulations were well defined and they were reasonable and they had opportunity for input, I think people would come together on this issue. I don't know of any land developers or home builders who really want to just have just a patchwork of development in these rural areas that are on the periphery of the metropolitan areas, to where there's not some uniformity to it or some way for people to use their land. So I'm not proposing something that would regulate a ranch owner who continues to ranch their land or farm their land or use it for agricultural purposes or for recreational purposes, game hunting, things like that. But if they're going to erect vertical improvements on it in the way of housing, there needs to be some standard that does not currently exist. And that's what I'm suggesting.
I know it's a little bit of a nuanced question. From a developer standpoint, do you feel the incentives that are provided by governments, whether it's or the potential gain of less permitting costs, rebates on sustainability tax incentives, do these entice developers? Are these sustainable? Are these something that will kind of push developers towards that sustainability and community focused planning?
Yes. I'm a big fan of incentives. I think there can be public-private partnerships formed between developers, private capital, private enterprise, and public governmental units that are win-win for both sides. I've done that for many years. I've been using Chapter 380 agreements and Chapter 381 agreements and all manner of economic development incentive arrangements, tax increment reinvestment zones. We've been using a lot of vehicles that are allowed under state statute in Texas, and it's turned out very well so far, and it does provide an incentive. And I think we'll see more developers seek out those arrangements, and I'm already seeing more municipalities being willing to extend various types of incentives in exchange for developers coming to their community. So yes, I will see that more than we even have seen it so far.
Well, that kind of touches on a little bit of our next segment, which is these municipalities that will reside within the Texas Triangle. And I do want to take a step back for those that may not be familiar with the term Texas Triangle, but it's, I believe, if you take a line from the DFW and you draw kind of an isosceles line of a triangle down to Houston and across to San Antonio, Austin metropolitan area, and then back up to Dallas, Fort Worth metropolitan area, you have a triangle that resides in a good portion of that spans from the Texas Hill Country to the central and even touches into the East Coast, where by the year 2030, 2040, 70 to 80% of the Texas population will reside in this triangle. And we've touched on resource management, especially water management, work with developers and the private-public partnerships. So, Gary, with the Texas Triangle becoming a trend, and, as we were talking, it's becoming more and more as a common nomenclature in real estate development, just referring to the demographic changes of this region. What role do you think this area will play in shaping the future of Texas real estate?
It's going to be the most attractive region in the United States. It already is on the verge of being the most attractive region. So there's no question but that we'll see higher density urban development in the existing in the core of the existing metropolitan areas that form the corners of the Texas Triangle, that being the DFW area on the top of the triangle, coming all the way down to Austin, San Antonio region, which sooner than later is going to become one mega region. Cisneros speaks of this and has given many symposiums on this and backed his analysis up with facts. And then you go all the way over to Houston, which forms the other eastern point of the triangle. So at those 3 points, continued mega growth. And a lot of that growth will be very high density growth in the urban areas. Even downtown, you'll continue to see downtown redevelopment and growth in these metropolitan areas. But if these land development regulations that I've just spoken of and these new laws are enacted by the Texas legislature that would give counties the ability to properly govern how land is developed within the Texas Triangle and also land that is within a reasonable driving distance of this Texas Triangle region. I mean, we'll see a lot of growth that is significantly beyond the rate of growth we've seen in the past 50 years. Aaron, it's the only realistic way that Texas can accommodate all of this in-migration of residents and other forms of population increase. We really shouldn't wait any longer to address this means of responsible planning. Not everybody is going to live in a 50-story residential tower. Some will choose to do that in a downtown core development, but that's not the lifestyle for everybody. Other people will want to live in the suburbs that are within easy commuting distance to the downtown core if they need to come downtown. And then there's a third group that will want to live in the country, what they consider and what today is still the countryside, but these country towns are going to experience, relative to their size, they're going to experience massive increases in population. That's going to be, it's going to be close to sort of a shocking dynamic.
I was going to say, it could be a cultural clash. I mean,
it is.
Stephenville and Brownwood area,
it is.
Not much changes or fast. If it does change, I mean, when Starbucks came to the town when I was in high school, it was a big thing, you know?
I know. I brought Starbucks to Brownwood, and
I bet lines out the door.
And half the town loved it, and the other half said, I just don't see how they can stay open very long selling coffee at that price. So, to a 50, they were used to a 50-cent cup of coffee, where the other people were paying $3.95 for a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So, and I would explain to these people, people are paying for an experience. They're buying coffee, true, and they think it's good coffee, but they're paying for the experience. And you'd get the shake of the head. Well, I don't need to pay another $2.50 a cup to get an experience. I like my experience at home with my 50-cent coffee.
I mean, I know it's maybe making a stretch, but a coffee to a house or a living quarters, you see that happening in these small towns like Stephenville, Brownwood, outside of the bands of the Texas Triangle, where they want that hill country experience, but they're still close to the amenities.
Well, a lot of these people who have second homes in these rural towns, or that choose to take early retirement and move to these towns, they like the quaintness of the town, but they also enjoy the amenities of what they left behind in the metropolitan areas. So they want it all. They want everything. They want both. They want the quietness of the town. They want the friendly nature of all of the residents, generally speaking. They want to see the stars at night and not have light pollution. And there's a lot of things that go into the mix, but they also want to be able to go to Starbucks and get their coffee.
Yeah. Well, again, with these demographic shifts and these trends, these come with new wants and needs and desires. So as we kind of look around the interior as well as the exterior bands of the Texas Triangle, what trends are you seeing in terms of types of developments or housing solutions are kind of being demanded by these new residents, migrations, or businesses coming into these regions?
Well, so technology has enabled people to become better educated in a general sense and thus become better at their jobs. And we've had all this amazing increase in productivity that's occurred at an astounding rate, regardless of what industry somebody works in. And so, again, give technology the credit for this. So we have a recruitment of tech employers throughout Texas, and especially in Austin, because we're experiencing such an influx of younger tech workers that are coming to Texas and adding to the pool of workers that are already here and are educated and decided to remain here and are really, have been here all their lives. And so they're seeking these employment opportunities and different lifestyles that exist. And we have this that's a different dynamic and a different that provides an array of choices to people compared to other states and regions in the United States. So we're going to see a lot of workers that are well educated, have adopted the technology, and if they're not tech workers, they know how to use technology in some other career choice, and that is very, very desirable by employers who are relocating here. Some of them are relocating their home offices, their headquarters here. Tesla, by way of example. Oracle relocated, although they've now relocated their home office again to Nashville. But they still have a significant presence here. Apple, has the largest campus here outside of their headquarters in Cupertino. So
you can't go and have a conversation with anybody at anything without talking about that Samsung factory that's going out in Taylor, Texas.
Samsung, I mean, all of these are all decisions by corporate, these giant corporate technology companies, and they're purpose driven. They're not just made willy nilly. I mean,
not just taking a dart and saying,
no,
Texas region.
Exactly. So some of these workers, they're going to be seeking housing in these dense urban cores of the metropolitan areas because that's the lifestyle they want to have, and they can afford that kind of a lifestyle. But what happens is many of these people build relationships. They start out as singles, and then they build some form of relationship, and it results in marriages, and it results in two-person households from a single household, and then with many of the relationships, children end up being a part of they're born of the marriage, or the couples adopt children, and they tend to seek some of these suburban housing choices instead of remaining to live in the urban core of the city because of really their lifestyles are changed because of children. So eventually what they do, they accumulate enough wealth, again, as I touched on earlier, through the success of their careers, by their career trajectory, or they have an inheritance from their boomer parents, or both, and they get to a point where they can afford a second home that is maybe in close proximity to small towns or outside of metropolitan areas, and these second homes then over time become their primary retirement residence. So we in Texas have enough land to accommodate a really bad word in development that's called urban sprawl. And urban sprawl is with land planners is a disdain. They disdain urban sprawl, and they've really tried to encourage people to consider more dense forms of living. That, frankly, you find in other countries around the world. Japan, China, these other places, it's very dense where people live. But in the United States, I think people should have the freedom of choice. That's one of the big things about Texas. Texas, the myth of Texas is very large. The lore of Texas is not, people call it a myth that Texas is large. Well, it's not a myth. It actually is large. It's a large state. It has a lot of land area. It's famous for that, and we can accommodate this urban sprawl. Now, urban sprawl has created a lot of problems with land planning and the provision of infrastructure in cities, but cities have gotten smarter at how they deal with this, and I don't think we can avoid urban sprawl. I mean, if the number one, number two, and number three largest metropolitan areas in the United States that exist today, which is New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, are replaced by a new number one, number two, and number three by the year 2100, which is predicted in a study that's uses some very sound assumptions, I might add. And that study predicts that the new number one, number two, and number three metropolitan areas, in the United States in 76 years, or by the year 2100, will be Dallas-Fort Worth region number one with approximately 34 million people. Houston number two with about 33 million people. And take your breath away, Austin metropolitan region will grow to 24 million people. It'll be the third largest metropolitan area in the United States. So the top three metropolitan areas will be the three tips of this Texas Triangle region that you mentioned. If that happens, it can only happen if we have the land. Well, we do have the land. And I don't know of any other state that has the resources and the land like Texas has. Number two, we have to have an economy, a state economy, and we have to have other things in the state of Texas that are desirable for people to want to come here. I'm very concerned about our educational system, that it's just going to have to keep pace. It's going to have to keep up. And it has not kept up in K through 12. And I am a firm believer in public education. I do not believe that you can address the educational needs of children going forward with all private universities. I'm not against private schools. I'm not against private schools or charter schools. If that's the choice of parents and their children, that's fine. But I don't think charter schools and privately funded schools are the answer for education of our workforce in the future. I mean, I think public schools have a place in our way of life in the United States, and I don't think that's going away. But they have to keep up. They have to keep up. And, Texas is so far behind, Aaron. What we pay our teachers. I was having a conversation yesterday with a teacher, and she, coincidentally, in Brownwood, Texas, who has retired in Brownwood. And she, of course, informed me where Texas was in comparison to the other 49 states, and we're like at the bottom in teacher pay. Mm-hmm. And that's not right, because teachers have such an outsized influence on our children. We have to catch up. We have to do something about that. So, but as long as we are addressing these issues, we have the land, we have the resources, we do something about water and other things, and we have regulation that's proper regulation, not a ball of red tape, but properly prepared and enacted. I think we'll see the population increases here. It's inevitable. Mm-hmm. So we be ready for it. That's my opinion.
Well, Gary, as we're kind of coming to a close of our episode, I want to kind of look ahead as well. Don't want this all to be doom and gloom, of course. But what excites Gary Davis? What kind of gets you fired up about the future of real estate or the housing in Texas? And, how do you foresee, you're spry, 71 years young, how you can continue to contribute to this vision?
So I don't know that it's the same thing my dog in the background is excited about, if you can hear him.
No, can't hear.
Anyway, let me address that. So for me, Texas has always provided, Aaron, it's always provided these opportunities for land developers. And with a continued population growth, which I think is inevitable, these opportunities are only going to increase. They're not going to diminish. And as a result, they're going to attract new developers from out of state to open regional offices in Texas. And this is actually already happening. There are some of the largest housing developers and home builders in the United States that have regional offices in Texas and have had regional offices for many years, as a matter of fact. So, as maybe we touched on, as I recall, I just celebrated my 71st birthday on Monday. I plan to work for at least another 10 years, subject to my health allowing me to do so, and people do tend to live and work longer now than, with benefits of modern medicine and healthcare, people are working longer and they enjoy working. And so depending on the willingness of my family members to continue with our business, I think my sons and their children and our grandchildren perhaps will have an outsized opportunity to grow our business. I have tried to build a platform for the continuation of our company, and I'm seeing some interest in my family now in continuing the business. But to be fair, and I want to be fair, the decision will ultimately be theirs to make, to decide if they want to perpetuate this into the beyond the fourth generation, which Clifton is, of our family, to do what we do and go into the fifth and sixth generation. I'm very blessed. I mean, I love this business. I love real estate. I'm not going to stop. And there's just this abundance of opportunity in Texas. I mean, gosh, I just can't believe how lucky I've been. I really do. It's a great blessing, and I'm very proud of what we've been able to achieve.
I mean, for those that are just starting out in the industry, or if you had to turn the clock back and give young Gary some advice, what advice would you give to young professionals looking to make their mark in Texas or just the broader real estate industry?
That's such a great question. And I would advise anybody who has any interest in pursuing a career in real estate, in the real estate business, or in any facet. There's so many facets of the real estate business, but whatever that is, just to take as many educational courses as they possibly can. Real estate, with all of these facets, it requires really a dedication to learning and to be educated, and it's really only can be mastered if someone is well educated in all of the different areas of the real estate industry. So I just would encourage people to seek out a mentor who can, and that mentor can pass along experiences and wisdom that they have gained and accumulated during their career. And just like I experienced, I mean, I had not one mentor, but numerous mentors, and I just was like a sponge and soaked it up, because there's no substitute for experience being passed along by a mentor. So I would also try to determine if real estate is a career that meets a person's goals, and if it's what they wish to pursue with their work life. I mean, their work life may not be suitable for real estate. It is not necessarily regimented and an 8-hour day. I mean, you can spend much longer in a work day than that. You do have flexible hours. That's a benefit. You have flexible vacation time. But what happens is it gets in your blood and you tend to become a workaholic. And so you have to manage that and fight against that, because you do need time off to be productive and continue being productive. So, but the thing is, I'd sum it up and say, I just don't know. And I learned this, fortunately, at a very young age. I mean, quickly, when I got a real estate license, I was not of a legal age to get a license. I had to have our family attorney go to state district court and submit a motion to the district judge in our county to have my disabilities of minority removed. That's a legal phrase that's used, that if a person wants to seek a vocational license from some state agency in Texas and they're not of the legal age that is required by that state agency to obtain licensure, then there is a remedy to that, and you have to file this motion in state district court, and you have to be interviewed by the state district judge. And if he determines there's good cause to legally have your, as it's called again, disability of minority removed, then you can become the licensed, obtain the license that you're seeking. And I had to do that. And it wasn't something I was ashamed of doing. It was, in fact, many people, they were just like, wow, I think this guy's serious about this. So I had to undertake a course of study before and I had to take tests and pass those tests with the State Real Estate Commission. But once I was eligible for licensure, that was the next step, and I did it at a young age of 19 years old. So, but I just don't know of another career choice where somebody can produce personal wealth and really satisfaction with their work like the real estate business. And I'm a big fan of real estate, obviously, because I'm third generation. It's not for everyone, but it truly is a career that can change a person's life like no other career choice I've ever encountered. So,
Gary, I appreciate you carving part of your time and sharing your wisdom and experience, because, I mean, that's what it's all about. So thank you, sir.
absolutely glad to do it. And I'm so proud of what you're doing with your podcast. And so keep it up, because it's part of an educational process that is a new form of education that I find highly fascinating. And it's a new form of communication as well. I'm fascinated by it. So congratulations to you.
Well, I couldn't have done it without the experience and wonderful guests like yourself, Gary. So I appreciate your time and just, again, your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much.
And for those that are listening, thank you for taking the time and joining us on this educational journey as well. And I look forward to talking to you again here on the next Market Pulse. Have a great day.